Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, President Biden will require federal contractors to pay workers at least $15 an hour. An executive order that amounts to a $4.05 wage hike into new contract solicitations by January 2022, and then into new contracts by March of 2022. The order is likely to face opposition in the business community, but it fulfills a first-week promise the president made to minimum wage workers. Dana Peterson is chief economist at the Conference Board, and she joins us now from New Jersey with more. Dana, it's so great to have you on the show. Give us an idea of just how this fits into the picture of boosting working conditions across the country. I'm curious about the economic effects of boosting minimum wage. What are we going to see in terms of the way that it affects the economy?
Sure, there are probably going to be pretty mixed effects. So certainly for the workers who are at the lower wage, and if they see higher wages, then they may be much more happy. Potentially, they can have more money to spend, which could contribute to consumption and thereby stronger GDP growth. However, it also means potentially faster consumer price inflation as you have many more people who would potentially have these extra funds to spend. From the business perspective, for certain businesses, especially those that are very heavy in terms of the number of people who are earning minimum wages, especially the retail sector, also the restaurant sector, and certain parts of government, that means higher wages and potentially decisions about whether or not to hire more workers or to let people go, or even to pass those costs on to the consumer. So there are certainly mixed effects here.
Hey, Dana, we want to talk about this report that came out from the Conference Board today. Essentially, it found that in 2020, job satisfaction did not drop despite the pandemic. I mean, what led to job satisfaction from what it is that you and your colleagues found?
Sure. Actually, job satisfaction was the highest in 20 years, and that is despite the pandemic. 56.9% of respondents said that they were rather satisfied. And what led to that is the fact that many businesses took control of the things that they could, and they were much more generous about leave, flex time. Certainly, when it came to performance reviews, they were a little less stringent, recognizing that many of their employees were under very stressful situations given the pandemic.
What can companies take away from the way that the people you surveyed felt about their working conditions in 2020? The emphasis on this idea of a hybrid work environment, healthcare benefits, and more. What can executives learn from what they need to do for workers?
Well, I think, certainly happy workers makes for a happy workplace. And I think executives learn that. And things that we noticed in the report that, weren't very good, or rather were worse off, were things that companies really couldn't control, especially with respect to finances, such as wages and pension plans. But certainly the things that they could control demonstrated that if businesses are listening to workers and caring about their lives apart from the actual job, then that makes for better productivity and certainly much more satisfied workers.
You're an economist, so what does this mean for the long-term growth of the U.S. and for companies with happy workers? How does that fit into GDP growth and economic growth?
Well, certainly it means higher productivity, and productivity over the longer run is a component to GDP. And certainly if businesses are investing in technology, if they are investing in ways to make sure that their workers can be more productive, then that means greater output and consequently faster growth of the general economy.
Dana, we also, this report that you and your team have out also comes on a day where the Washington Post and ABC put out a poll about women of color and people of color still feeling like they are financially worse off at this point in the pandemic than they were prior to it. So I wonder, sort of given what it is that you and your team found, and given where women of color and people of color are still struggling and still, having to work harder than a lot of their peers, how do corporations better target these employers so that these women and these people of color feel the same job satisfaction that you found?
Sure. Well, a few things. Number one, in our report, it turned out that the net effects of remote work might have been neutralized. On the one hand, some people found it better that they didn't have to commute. They enjoyed working from home, lowered costs. But for many other people, it just wasn't the best in terms of having to still care for children who are out of school or dependent adults, or losing visibility, which is something that's really important for different persons of color. And also, I think that report that you mentioned is consistent with what we've been seeing in the labor market data. Even while unemployment rates are falling, the overall unemployment rate has fallen. It's still very elevated for women. Well, not so much for all women, but certainly women of color. And also, when we look at women in general, many of them have left the labor force, especially women with children, because the pandemic has put those strains on them. And given the child care crisis, and also because schools were closed, that put extra burdens on women, and especially women of color. So it means businesses must be very sensitive to their needs.
And what does that look like to you?
Sure. Well, some of the things that we mentioned in our report in terms of making sure that people have access to equal amounts of leave, that people have access to equal wages, that people have access to training and opportunities, international assignments, all those kind of great things that really propel one's career. We have to make sure that these women are having those opportunities.
Hey, Dana, can't let you leave without talking a little about inflation. We're in the midst of earnings season right now. A third of S&P 500 companies are reporting this week. Last week, we learned from Chipotle and Procter & Gamble that they are seeing higher input costs as a result, raising some prices, at least in the case of Procter & Gamble. Spotify yesterday saying that they're raising prices on some consumer plans out there. How do you see inflation playing into economic growth this year and beyond?
Well, we actually fully expect that there will be faster inflation. Certainly in the second quarter, some of it's going to be a function of basis effects. Last year, prices collapsed, and so you're going to have that roller coaster rebound. However, we do anticipate that many costs, certainly for food, energy, are going to be rising, and even for services as people switch consumption from mainly goods back towards in-person services. So this is all factored in. And plus, if you're looking at growth that's in the 6 or even the 7% range, then you're going to have faster prices accompanying that. So this is all to be expected.
Well, Dana Peterson, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights on this new report from you and your team. Chief Economist at the Conference Board, Dana Peterson in West Orange for us.